They were assigned to Lyranal, the garden moon of a newly conquered world. The mission given to the duo was to take soil samples and water samples, that's it. However, just past the vines were plants that appeared to be identical in texture to lamb's ears. Valen had reached to pluck one petal, meaning to touch it later in secret. But when he pushed past the vines, he found that the leaf was only a small part of the mystery. The fuzzy plant had grown fruit just smaller than a plum but the color of electric raspberries. The glow coming from them seemed to pulse. Were it not for his helmeted spacesuit, he would have knelt before the plant then and eaten from it. He settled for plucking one instead, when Elara walked up. "I'm finished with my collection, are you?" The sound died in her throat as she gazed on the fruit. Valen plucked 4 more without a word before meeting her eyes. She was smiling at him, not the thin professional smile of a partner, but something fiercer and more private, the smile of someone who had already made the same decision. On her side of the site, beneath a low canopy of silver-veined leaves, she had found a berry cluster, the color and intensity of error-screen blue. And beside it, hanging in heavy pairs from a slender, gray-barked tree, a collection of smooth, golden fruit shaped like teardrops. Pears, or something close enough to deserve the name. She had already filled a second sample pouch with them. Just in case anyone was listening, they quietly collected their secret stash of Technicolor fruit and headed back to their research ship, back to their normal, desaturated world. What they didn't know, what no one outside of Command's upper tiers knew, was that the desaturation wasn't entirely natural. The Great Muting was a filtering technology woven into every helmet, every visor, every recycled breath of ship air. It had been so long and so total that most people had simply forgotten there was anything left to mute. The cabin was a cathedral of glass and brushed titanium. Outside, the alien sky was a flat, dead iron. The air was recycled and thin, smelling of ozone and static. Valen cracked the inner seal of his helmet and lifted it free, setting it on the rack by the airlock. Elara did the same, and for a moment they simply stood there in their suits, breathing unfiltered ship air, still gray, still processed, but at least their own. They sat so close their knees brushed, a rare friction in a world of smooth surfaces. Valen held the electric raspberry fruit, a heavy velvet-skinned sphere that seemed to pull the very gravity of the room toward it. It was the only thing in the universe that wasn't gray. "But what if that fruit is poisonous?" Elara asked, her eyes fixed on the translucent juice, already beating at the stem where he'd plucked it. Are you enjoying this story so far? If so, subscribe for more stories like this. Now let's see how Valen responds. Valen smiled defiantly at her. What's the fun in that? He sliced it with a ceramic blade, and the scent hit them first. A heady, intoxicating perfume of hibiscus watermelon with a dash of dragon fruit. It was the smell of a summer they had never been allowed to have. As he bit down, a sharp, involuntary gasp broke from his lips. His body stiffened in the pilot's chair, his spine snapping rigid as his eyes rolled back for a heartbeat. It was a neurological riot. The fruit was rewiring his senses, turning the gray static of his brain into a vivid, pulsing map of light. She reached out and took a piece for herself, settling into the seat next to him and gripping the chair. As the juice stained their fingertips, a deep royal crimson, the world tilted. The flat gray shadows on Elara's neck dissolved into a rich, honeyed amber. The dull hum of the life support system transformed into a rhythmic, pulsing thrum that matched the beat of her heart. Valen looked up, and the breath left him. He hadn't just been blind. He had been frozen. Now, the ice was melting. He saw the fire in her eyes, not just the reflection of the console lights, but a fierce, emerald spark of life. He saw the fine, golden down on her cheek, and the way her pulse jumped in the hollow of her throat. She wasn't a partner. She was a revelation. Elara reached out, her hand no longer a damp mountain gray, but a warm, living weight against his jaw. Her touch felt like a spark jumping a gap, a sudden surge of electricity that made his skin ache for more. "I can see you," she whispered, her voice a lush, velvet texture that vibrated through his very bones. "Valen, you're beautiful." The sterile world of command fell away. The buttons, the screens, the mission, it all became a blurred, insignificant background. As they leaned in, the space between them vanished. The gray world ended at the touch of their lips, replaced by a riot of color so intense it felt like the birth of a star. In that kiss, they weren't just pilots on a mission. They were the first two people to ever truly be alive. The kiss broke, but the electricity remained. Valen lunged for the console, pulling up the archives. For years, he had scrolled through his digital life, seeing only shades of slate and smoke. And he had believed, as command intended, that this was simply how things were. He swiped a finger and a photo of his mother blossomed onto the screen. He gasped. Her dress wasn't dark. It was a defiant, screaming yellow. Her eyes were a piercing, oceanic blue. "Elara, look," he breathed. She was already at the observation port. The void was gone. The stars weren't just white pinpricks. They were jewels of sapphire, orange, and copper. The gas clouds of the Magellanic Reach were swirling rivers of violet and lime. A celestial ocean of paint spilled across the infinity. They moved like addicts through the small cabin, watching monochrome influencers with a new, terrifying clarity. They saw the subtle flush of a lie on a face and the hidden richness of a silk scarf. It was a frantic, beautiful chaos, realizing that their entire lives hadn't been lived, but merely sketched. Valen turned back to her, his face lit by the kaleidoscope of the monitor. Everything we've ever done, everything we've ever seen, we have to see it all again, every single second of it. The euphoria hit a wall of cold reality. Valen grabbed a standard-issue nutrient pack labeled Summer Harvest. He tore it open, expecting crimson. It was gray, a flat, lifeless sludge like wet concrete. The Great Muting didn't just filter what they saw. It filtered what they were fed, what they were grown to accept, what they were taught to call enough. Now that his eyes were alive, the food command provided was a void. It was dead matter, processed into a ghost of a meal. "Valen, look at this," Elara whispered. She had bypassed the firewalls, digging into ancient terrestrial files. A hologram bloomed in the center of the cockpit. It was a greenhouse, a riot of emerald vines, tomatoes like droplets of blood, and hills of grass that seemed to breathe in jade and gold. "It's not us," Elara said, her voice trembling. "There's nothing wrong with our world, Valen. It's what we've done to it. We've turned the earth to ash and told ourselves ash was enough." The mission was no longer about the stars. The fruit had given them a map. Valen grabbed the manual override, his hand steady. "We aren't going back to the base," he said. He looked at the vast, indigo abyss stretching beyond the glass. And for the first time, it didn't look like emptiness. It looked like distance. The specific, conquerable distance between where they were and where they needed to be. "We're going to find a place where the dirt still remembers the sun. We're going home." He dumped the gray sludge into the reclamation chute. The mechanical whir sounded to him like the baritones of a funeral song. He slammed the manual stabilizers, and the ship groaned as he forced the nose to pivot 180 degrees. Beside him, Elara reached into her second sample pouch and pulled out one of the golden pears. She bit into it with a crunch that echoed through the hull. The juice ran down her chin, a streak of liquid amber, and handed a piece to Valen. He chewed slowly, the flavor exploding like a supernova. Notes of sun-warmed earth and rain. "Where are we going first?" she asked. Valen swallowed, the heat of the fruit warming his chest. He looked at the stars. "Nip, we're going back for the rest of the orchard," he said. "And then, we're going to plant it in the middle of their gray world until the concrete cracks." The ship didn't just fly. It hunted. Valen pushed the engines into the red, the vibrations rattling the titanium floorboards beneath their boots. In the old world, the vibration warning was a nuisance. A flickering gray light filtered to near invisibility. Now he could see the frequency. He saw the way the sound waves rippled through the cockpit in waves of shimmering violet. Every rattle was a note. Every hum was a chorus. Beside him, Elara was recalibrating the sensors. "They're tracking us, Valen," she said, but her voice didn't carry the old tremor of fear. It carried the thrill of a predator. The command ships look like jagged shards of charcoal against the velvet. They're trying to find our frequency, but they're blind. They're looking for gray signals in a world that's turning neon. As they broke the atmosphere of Lyranel for the second time, the great muting of the clouds shattered. They didn't just descend through fog. They dove through a sea of crushed pearls and liquid opal. The friction of entry didn't just heat the hull. It turned the sky into a roaring, burning canyon of sunset oranges and bruised plums. Valen gripped the stick, his knuckles white, not with tension, but with the raw, physical joy of feeling the ship respond to the gravity of a living world. "Look at the canopy," he whispered, gesturing to the monitor. The forest below wasn't just a mass of texture anymore. It was a breathing, undulating carpet of 1,000 greens. From the pale electric lime of new shoots to the deep, ancient moss green that looked like velvet shadows. They landed in a clearing where the trees stood like giants carved from cinnamon and mahogany. When the hatch hissed open, the air didn't just enter, it invaded. It didn't taste like the recycled copper of the ship. It tasted of damp earth, fermenting sugar, and the sharp, cold bite of mountain water. Valen stepped out first, his boots sinking into a carpet of clover that felt like walking on a living lung. He looked at his suit, the tactical slate gray armor that had been his second skin for a decade. It looked like a scab, a piece of dead technology trying to hide the man underneath. He reached for his helmet seals. "Valen, wait," Elara cautioned, her hand on the airlock. "The atmospheric readings are off the charts. The oxygen density, the spores." "Let it change us, Elara," he replied, his voice thick with a hunger that surpassed safety. He clicked the seals. The hiss was the sound of a wall falling down. As he pulled the helmet away, the colors didn't just brighten. They became three-dimensional. He could smell the indigo of the distant mountains. He could feel the gold of the sun on his face, like a physical weight. Behind him, Elara followed suit, her hair spilling out like a dark river finally freed from its banks. She gasped, her lungs filling with air so pure it felt like drinking from a cold spring. For a moment, they just stood there, two gray ghosts, finally catching fire in the middle of a masterpiece. They began to run, not away from anything, but toward the heart of the orchard. They found the lamb's ear plants again, but now they saw the context. They were the ground cover for trees that bore fruit like hanging lanterns. Heavy, glowing globes of sapphire and citron that hummed with the vibration of 1,000 bees. Elara reached up, pulling a low-hanging branch down. The leaves were translucent, veined with silver that pulsed in time with the moon's gravity. "It's a network," she realized, her fingers tracing the glowing veins. "The fruit isn't just food. It's the memory of the planet. Every bite is a piece of the story they tried to make us forget." Suddenly, the ground trembled. Far above, the sky was pierced by the cold, sterile white of a command descent pod. The hunters had arrived, but as Valen looked up at the gray metal falling toward their paradise, he didn't reach for his pulse rifle. He looked at the fruit in his hand, then at Elara, whose skin was now glowing with the golden reflection of the forest. "They think they're coming to arrest us," Valen said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He plucked a handful of the electric blue berries and held them out to her. "But they've never fought an army that can actually see what they're fighting for. Let them land. We're going to feed them until they can't remember how to pull a trigger." The command descent pod hit the earth with a dull, synthetic thud, a brutal slab of charcoal crushing the vibrant clover. Out stepped the enforcers, 6 figures clad in pressurized obsidian armor, their visors a flat, light-drinking black. They moved with the jerky, mechanical precision of men who had never felt the ground beneath their boots. To them, this forest was a biohazard zone. To Valen and Elara, watching from the mahogany shadows, it was a sanctuary. Valen didn't reach for his blaster. Instead, he stripped a length of translucent, rubbery vine from a nearby lute tree, incredibly strong, vibrating with a natural elasticity. and tied it between two forks of a silver-veined branch, fashioning a crude, powerful slingshot. "Don't aim for the armor," he whispered. "Aim for the seals. Aim for the air intakes." Elara nodded, her hands already stained with the royal crimson of the electric raspberries. She loaded a cluster of the error-screen blue berries into her own sling. They weren't just projectiles. They were glowing delivery systems of consciousness. With a synchronized snap of the vines, the fruit took flight. They didn't whistle like bullets. They hummed like angry bees. The first shot struck the lead enforcer square in the chest plate, exploding in a starburst of neon blue that clung to the black armor like glowing radioactive sap. The enforcers froze, their sensors screaming contamination. They scrambled to wipe the glowing sludge away, but the more they touched it, the more the vibrant pigment bled into the joints of their suits. Another volley followed. A golden pair struck the air intake of the youngest guard, a recruit named Kale. The fruit was so ripe it turned to a fine, misty spray upon impact. The intoxicating scent of hibiscus watermelon and wild honey was sucked instantly into his helmet's filtration system. Inside his sterile, gray-filtered world, Kale suddenly smelled the sun. He stumbled, his pulse rifle lowering as his brain struggled to categorize a sensation that shouldn't exist. Valen stepped out from the shadows, his face uncovered, his eyes burning with fierce, emerald clarity. He didn't look like a traitor. He looked like a god of the woods. He held a single, pulsing electric raspberry in his open palm. The enforcers leveled their weapons, but their hands were shaking. They were looking at a man who was breathing the hazard. "It's not poison, Kale," Valen said, his voice amplified by the natural acoustics of the trees. "It's just the world. You've been living in a coffin. Don't you want to know what color your mother's eyes actually were?" The young recruit let out a ragged sob that crackled over the squad's comlink. The blue sap on his visor was glowing so brightly, it was beginning to burn through the great muting filter. He reached up, his gloved fingers trembling as they fumbled with the emergency release. "Kale, negative! It's a biotoxin!" the sergeant screamed, but it was too late. The seals hissed, a long, agonizing exhale of the old world. Kale pulled the helmet off. He gasped, his lungs seizing as the raw, floral oxygen hit him like a physical blow. He looked up at the canopy, and the rifle clattered to the dirt. His eyes, once a dull, milky gray, began to flood with color, the pupils widening until they captured the sapphire light of the stars above. Kale reached out, his bare hand touching the blue sap on his armor. He licked a finger, and his entire body jolted as if struck by lightning. The neurological riot hit him instantly. He looked at his fellow enforcers, still trapped in their black shells, and saw them for what they were: shadows. He turned to Valen and Elara, a slow, dazed smile breaking across his face. "I can see," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Everything. Everything is screaming with light." One by one, the other enforcers lowered their weapons. The scent of the crushed fruit was now a cloud around them, a sweet, irresistible invitation to stop being machines. The sergeant didn't break easily. He was a man made of scar tissue and regulations, his black visor fixed on Valen like the eye of a dead shark. "Reseal your helmets," he roared, his voice distorted by the speaker grill. "It's a hallucinogen. It's a trick of the atmosphere." He raised his heavy pulse cannon, the barrel humming with a cold white light. But his own squad was drifting away from him, kneeling in the clover, touching the leaves like they were made of silk, their discarded helmets lying in the grass like hollow skulls. Elara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her hands open, her skin shimmering with the iridescent dust of the forest. She didn't use a slingshot this time. She held a single electric raspberry, its juice glowing like a live ember between her fingers. "It's not a trick, Sarge," she said, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum of his cannon. "The trick was the slurry. The trick was the gray. You've been fighting for a world that doesn't even have a sunset. Don't you want to know what color your metals actually are?" She didn't throw it. She walked right up to the barrel of his gun and pressed the fruit against the external oxygen intake of his chest plate. The scent was a tidal wave. watermelon, dragon fruit, and the raw green scent of a world that refused to die. The sergeant's aim wavered. The white light of his cannon flickered and died. A jagged metallic sob escaped his suit, the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 20 years. With a violent, desperate motion, he ripped his helmet off and threw it. It struck a mahogany tree with a hollow clang and fell into the dirt, insignificant and small. The sergeant fell to his knees. He didn't look at Valen or Elara. He looked at his own hands. For the first time, he saw the deep, weathered tan of his skin, the silver of his hair, the bright oxygenated red blooming in his cheeks. He reached out and grabbed a handful of soil, letting the dark, loamy earth sift through his fingers. He began to laugh, a raw, terrifyingly joyful sound that echoed through the vibrant canopy. "It's all real," he choked out, the emerald light of the forest reflecting in his streaming eyes. "It's all real." Above them, the sky began to shift into a deep, celestial violet, the first stars of evening beginning to pulse with sapphire fire. The 6 enforcers and the 2 rebels stood together in the clearing, a small circle of technicolor life in a universe of shadows. They weren't just a squad anymore. They were a seed. Valen looked at Elara, her face a masterpiece of rose and gold in the fading light. He took her hand, their fingers interlaced, a warm, living connection that command could never process. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. "We have an entire galaxy to wake up." Thank you for watching Love Jolt Library. If you enjoyed the story, please consider liking and subscribing.